Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Where shortly, hopefully, you'll be listening to a veritable cavalcade of contributors addressing some of the crucial questions of our times. I enjoyed this interview with an outgoing police chief, the Chief Constable of Durham, in which he suggests, controversially, obviously, that sending people to prison is largely a waste of time. This would include burglars and violent drunks. Not all criminals, but just quite a lot of them. It is apparently more expensive to send them to prison than it is to send them to Eton. And of course, if you send them to Eton, they could end up being morally corrupt as opposed to criminally corrupt, but nevertheless achieve the brink of the Downing Street steps. So we'll talk about that as well, probably first. You can talk me through the leadership debate or address some of the broader, bigger questions thrown up, not just by the absence of the front runner, but perhaps more pertinently by the presence of the soon-to-be also-rans. And at 12 o'clock, I'd love to talk to you about the seaside, the English seaside. No, the British seaside. The British seaside. I was at the Irish seaside at the weekend. I had an absolutely glorious time in Dorky. I must say a quick hello to Declan Mulligan, taxi driver, who saved my life yesterday for reasons I won't bore you with. But the decline of the seaside is something really, really sad. I've got a bizarre. If the cards had fallen differently in my life, and I hadn't been cursed with such an overdeveloped ego, I think I might have quite liked doing a book about English seaside towns and their decline, touring. Do you know what I mean? I love places. Like we used to go to Blackpool, and I've become quite familiar with Margate and Ramsgate. I know Norfolk very well. Some Welsh seaside towns. Incredibly beautiful places, but with a sort of shabby grandeur. Bognor is furious this morning. Bognor Regis. Absolutely furious to have been ranked among the worst, joint worst ranking of UK seaside towns. So hopefully I'm not going to lie to you, I haven't yet come up with a genius way of breaking into this story as a phone-in topic, but I will do. And if I don't, then you can have a go. Come about 12 o'clock. 11 o'clock, the conversation about the Chief Constable's comments. I suspect we might, because I'm feeling quite chipper this morning, we might confine that conversation to people who have actually been in prison. I just think it might be a little bit more fruitful, stroke fertile, than inviting the contributions of people who wouldn't know prison from a hospital. We'll find out. I'm sort of just suggesting everything's a little bit up in the air today. But we begin with this Conservative leadership candidate battle. You certainly do not need to have seen last night's debate on Channel 4 to have a view on what is going on, or indeed to be qualified to contribute to this morning's programme, not least because I didn't see it. I was taxiing, I was stuck on the airport runway in Dublin as it started, and the flight was delayed. So weirdly, I was kind of following it on Twitter through the commentary and the comments, which was quite interesting, actually. But so many odd things, and it also gave me that ability to step back slightly from the fray and observe the ebb and flow of commentary on a grander scale. Here's just some weird stuff, which in my continuing doomed attempt to pour oil upon the waters of our fractured nation, as some people continue to delude and pretend that they voted for some unspecified greatness that Boris Johnson now represents, despite, of course, being the man who prepared two columns prior to the referendum, one urging you to vote Remain and one urging you to vote Leave. He has somehow managed to capture the constituency of people who change their story about what they actually voted for every few months and then furiously double down on the certainty that they actually voted for this thing that's completely different from the thing they said they voted for 3 months ago. So it's weird, right? Michael Gove is now not a proper leaver, as far as I can tell. I'm also going to make the point shortly that it would be nice to be talking about something other than Brexit in the context of who's going to be our next Prime Minister, but I didn't see the debates, but in the context of the commentary that I have seen, nothing else really seemed to register. The Daily Johnson, presumably, do you know, I haven't even checked today because it's such an apology for a newspaper now. So I'm going to do a little bit of live theatre for you now on LBC. I have in front of me a Daily Telegraph. I'm going to presume that it has offered yet another opportunity to Boris Johnson to make points and statements unchallenged and unexamined. You see, this is why he doesn't need to do the hustings. This is why he doesn't need to do the debates, because the mysterious twins who own the Daily Telegraph and have been paying him £270,000 a year to write a column for the last few years, they offer. I'm going to look a right prune now, aren't I? If the front page story is about cannabis or prisons or something like that. Let's have a look. Ready, everybody? Are we ready now? Front page story, Daily Telegraph. Boris, : fast internet for every home by 2025. Leadership favourite promises to eliminate the digital divide if he becomes PM. Why would he do the hustings? Why would he expose himself to scrutiny, even from journalists who have traditionally tickled his tummy over the last few years? They get palmed off with James Cleverly this morning, glancing at my television screens. So why would he? Why would he expose himself to questions from people? Why would he expose himself to you, if you pardon that rather unpleasant image, when he's got the front page of a Daily Telegraph to make unsubstantiable claims and promises that nobody will be allowed to pick him up over? Question I want to ask him: how many children have you got, Boris Johnson? That's all. Just that. Anyone knows? I take any answers. Go, just how many children have you got? Oh, no, I tell a lie. And how many times have you been to court to try to keep the existence of your own children secret from the British public? Just two little questions that we'll put out there. Answer them at your will. 9 minutes after 10 is the time. We digress. So the weirdest thing, as I could tell, about these debates yesterday, this debate yesterday, was that Michael Gove was co-chair of Vote Leave, right? Co-chair. But he's not a proper leaver. 0345 6060 973, if you can make sense of that. Rory Stewart voted 3 times for the withdrawal agreement that would take us out of the European Union. But he's a Remainer. 0345 6060 973. And the bloke who is admired for his, quotes, plain speaking, end quotes, is not speaking to anybody. So those are just my 3 observations through the lens of Brexit. If you can bring some analysis to the table that steers clear of Brexit, I'd actually be quite grateful to you today. But I suspect it's a fatuous exercise. I don't think this leadership campaign is actually ultimately about anything else. But you have... And then Dominic Raab, who apparently embarrassed himself. But, of course, I find the man ridiculous. So I'm in danger, as much as you are, of seeing what I want to see. It seems to me that is the mark of just how mad we have allowed things to become. Rory Stewart is categorically not on the same side of the Brexit debate as, for example, someone like me. How do I know this? Because I tweeted this morning that Rory Stewart is not on the same side of the Brexit debate as someone like me, and he retweeted it. So I think we can all conclude that that's a fairly obvious endorsement of my suggestion that he is a compromise candidate. He is genuinely trying to knit together 2 currently horribly divided parts of his own party, let alone the country. So this is for me the big curse. You can tell I was doing literary festivals this weekend, can't you? Because I've got so much fuel in the tank, I might not need to take any calls at all today. But this is what obviously I've been working towards this conclusion for some time. Theresa May's, if this was a Greek tragedy, then her curse, the gods cursed Theresa May by charging her. In her own mind, she thought her job was to limit the damage of Brexit, but she is prevented by the media and political environment from admitting in public that it is going to be in any way damaging. So think about that for a minute. It's got a sort of rather beautiful symmetry to it. I can never ever say that my job is to limit the damage of Brexit, but my job is to limit the damage of Brexit. That's why Theresa May was probably doomed from the start. Rory Stewart is adopting a slightly different approach, but not a very different approach. That's why it was reported this weekend that Theresa May actually voted for him in the first round of the leadership elections. Rory Stewart is essentially saying, look, we have to do Brexit in some way, shape or form. Brackets, can't say out loud, but even though it's damaging. But we also have to recognise the reality of the situation, which is there is no real possibility of improving on the deal that's already been negotiated. So Rory Stewart, oddly, is the Theresa May continuity candidate. He just perhaps will do a better job of selling compromise because, unlike Theresa May, he won't alienate and ignore all of the people that didn't want any kind of Brexit at all. But he is trying to woo the people who don't really want any kind of Brexit at all, but think we probably should do some kind of Brexit because that is at least how that corrupt vote went. You remember the big vote with the breaches of electoral law. Speaking of which, the sooner the Electoral Commission start looking into the result in Peterborough, the better. I'm sure you'd agree. And if it's found that electoral law has been breached in Peterborough, then you have to have it again. You have to do the ballot again. That's what happens when electoral law has been breached, right? Everybody wants another vote, don't they? What? There was massive breaches of electoral law during the referendum campaign, and the winning side are absolutely adamant that there shouldn't be another vote. And they're the same people in Peterborough claiming that there's been some sort of fix or rig, and that if it's proved that there has been, then there should be another by-election. But that can't be right. That would be like painting hypocrite across your forehead in 3-inch high letters. Hey, for the record, normal people, rational people, intelligent people, informed people would argue that if electoral law is breached ever, then you should rerun the ballot, whether it's in Peterborough or whether it's on a national referendum. That is a little nostalgia for you there of the days when politics was even vaguely consistent, evidence-based and honest. How evidence-based, consistent and honest is this election between the Conservative candidates? You tell me. If you watched it last night, tell me what you learned. 0345 6060 973. If you didn't watch it, but you recognise my suggestion that a mark of just how bonkers things has become is the fact that the chairman of Vote Leave is now being portrayed as not a proper leaver, while Rory Stewart, who voted 3 times to leave in the withdrawal agreement, is somehow a remainer. And how significant is it, and this perhaps is the question that I want you most to answer, what does it say about modern Britain that the man who would be king is terrified of appearing not just on television alongside his rivals, but today, unless things have changed since I came on air, and Theo Usherwood will bring us up to speed before close of play today, with the hustings among Conservative MPs. You might not know this because so much of our media is still doffing cap, tugging forelock, vote Johnson, even though we won't even talk to them. Imagine having spent the last 10 years sucking up to Boris Johnson and now you can't get an interview. Oh, how embarrassing. But anyway, here's the question. How have we ended up in a country where the man who would be king won't even be scrutinised by his own parliamentary colleagues? Who do you blame for that? Probably me. And of course, on the other side of the house, Tom Watson today is doing what many of us think or hoped would happen somewhat sooner, but the deputy leader of the Labour Party is throwing his, I was about to say his considerable weight, but it's considerably less considerable than it used to be before he got diabetes and went on an astonishing regime of diet and exercise, which has actually reversed his diabetes. So Tom Watson, if he were leader of the Labour Party, could claim realistically to have beaten diabetes and to have taken on Rupert Murdoch and won. Jeremy Corbyn, meanwhile, has grown some very large marrows. I would tell you he has thrown his weight, which isn't as considerable as it used to be, four square behind calls for another referendum. God knows what happens next. As you know, gave up predictions at the beginning of this year, but I think it'd be foolish not to suspect that Boris Johnson's going to land the big job, and the best way he can ensure that he gets the job is by refusing to answer any questions. And I'm just amazed that this Brexit project, which was supposed to be about transparency and accountability and democracy, I believe that those were misused lines. I believe we had lots of accountability and democracy and all of the above, and the events have proved me right. But all of those people who felt that they needed more democracy, accountability and transparency are now poised to cheer a man who offers none of the above into the highest office in the land. I just wonder how this has happened and what you make of the ongoing candidate competition. Let's start with Claire, who's in Marylebone. Claire, you can kick us off this morning. What would you like to say?
Yes, good morning.
Hello.
Well, my first impression, James, is Jeremy Corbyn doesn't have much to worry about, does he? I mean, for heaven's sake,
hang on, don't get me started.
That we saw yesterday. You know the one who infuriated me the most was Michael Gove.
Why?
One of the contributors said, quite plainly and categorically, in a beautiful, measured voice, I have an autistic child. What are you going to do about my children and other people like her to ensure they have a future. Michael Gove immediately launches into this diatribe, telling us for the 93rd time how wonderful he is and how he's going to save the universe, and he's the only one that terrorises Jeremy Corbyn. He then says at the end of his speech, I suspect you have a relative. She said to him, my child,
I have a
my
daughter.
son, he will
Yeah, but
not
hang on a minute.
listen.
Oh, I knew this was going to happen. I'm going to spend an hour defending all the Conservative candidates from callers' criticism now,
He
aren't I?
doesn't listen, James.
No, but it's a live television studio environment, and you can't, just because he slightly fumbled the ball that you describe, it doesn't prove anything about his character or his suitability for office.
He didn't listen.
No, but he might not have caught the beginning of it. The person next to him might have been clapping or something like that. I'm not. Yes.
The questions, I have to say, in defence of Krishnan Gurumurthy, it was really chaired and
You don't need to defend Krishnan. He's one of the best in the business. He's an absolute.
Krishnan Gurumurthy chaired it in an exemplary manner.
Of course he did. Right, so do you mean he was balanced, objective, and informed?
He was superb.
Well, the Brexiters will be furious.
They were given in utter silence. The person had the mic. The people were able to speak articulately and well. And the questions came over loud and clear.
So
Everybody
apart from Krishnan, who did well?
Well, I don't know. I mean, Dominic Raab is on Planet Dominic.
Do you know, it's just been reported by the actual Telegraph that his nickname while he was in charge of negotiations with Brussels, do you know what it was?
I can just imagine something derogatory.
Well, yeah, of course it was derogatory. They called him the turnip.
Well, I mean...
He would always be a turnip to me.
His solution is to prorogue Parliament if nothing happens. So Rory Stewart quite rightly said, if you want to circumvent and subvert Parliament, we will simply decant to the Methodist Church across the road, and we will continue...
So you liked Rory Stewart. I'm going to move on in a minute, Claire, because I suspect that we're not going to find many warm, glowing coals of admiration. Did Rory Stewart tickle your fancy at all?
Out of all of them, Rory Stewart came out as... This is going to be his downfall. Rory Stewart came out as the most honest. He had the most stature. The others, I would put in... No wonder Boris Johnson never bothered to turn up if that's the competition. It was a joke.
Oh, to be fair to Boris Johnson, it was Father's Day, and he's busier than most on Father's Day. We just can't get a completely clear handle on just how busy.
What, making more babies?
Well, no, that's not what you do on Father's Day, you silly woman. You look after the babies you've already had, the children you've already had. We're just struggling to work out how many children Boris Johnson has currently, which, of course, is a reason why he wouldn't have popped up for a debate on Father's Day. He might have way more than anyone realises. 0345 6060 973. So that is, I mean, really a tick in nobody's box. Rory Stewart, sort of currying favour and winning a lot of warmth from so-called Remainers. I enjoyed having him in the studio for two reasons. Number one, he's a Conservative politician who asked to come on, which I think was a first ever. And number two, he recognises reality. Now, I disagree with Rory Stewart about how we should deal with that reality, but he recognises reality. The reality is that whenever they claimed we'd be able to do this and do that and do the other, they were wrong. I don't think they were all lying, for the record. Some of them were, through their grimy teeth, but mostly they were just wrong or misinformed or a little bit confused or not very bright, Mark Francois. But in Rory Stewart's case, the recognition of reality is clear. There was a vote to leave. There is an agreement on how we will leave that has been agreed with the thing what we are leaving. And then the third way would be to call the whole thing off. There are only really three choices. There have been, as you know, for about a year. The three choices are call the whole thing off, leave with no deal at all, which precisely nobody voted for, despite what they're claiming now, or leave on the terms that we've agreed with the European Union after years and years of negotiation. That's it. That's all there is. Rory Stewart recognises that reality and has gone 100% behind option 3. Leave on the terms that have been agreed, which are pretty much the only terms that can be agreed. So that's why I quite liked him, because he at least recognised reality. Most of the other candidates still seem to be arguing, as Theresa May... despite Theresa May, they still seem to be arguing, well, if we just do exactly the same thing but in a slightly different accent, or wearing different clothes, or perhaps put a mask on and go back and demand that they reopen and do all the things Theresa May asked them to do, which they've refused to do. If Boris does it, or if Govey does it, or if the turnip does it, then they'll roll over. That's a denial of reality. So that's why I quite liked Rory Stewart, because he was honest. He admitted reality. But I completely disagree with him about which of those three options we should take. And I don't understand why so many people have sort of fallen into line behind him, who would sort of define themselves as leaning towards the politics of equality and fairness and decency. And I know that whips are important in this, and I know that it's a little bit unfair to pick over every nook and cranny of a politician's parliamentary performance, because you have to protect your own job. You can't spend your life voting against the leadership unless you're a professional heckler like Jeremy Corbyn. But Stewart's voting record on austerity policies is gross. It's just gross. A lot of people don't seem to mind or know about that. 10:27 is the time. Richard is in Salford. Richard, what's going on?
Yeah, so Boris, in my view, took a very wise decision not to appear on the talking heads, which essentially led to a load of sound bites and a lack of substance from each and every one of them. He was very aware of the fact that he would have been criticised, as you are now criticising all the people who attended, that they weren't able to say anything.
I was just defending them. I was just defending Michael Gove from Claire's criticism and praising Rory Stewart. I haven't mentioned any of the others yet, Richard. I don't know what programme you've been listening to.
Well,
who have I criticised?
Who
have I criticised?
First of all, I'd like your evidence.
Who have I criticised? Who have I criticised this morning?
Whoa, could you just calm down?
I'm super calm, my friend. Who have I criticised this morning from last night's debate?
When you're calm, you don't talk over people. So I'm trying to be calm with you.
OK, mate. So I'll ask you again. I'm not talking over you. Who have I criticised?
Where is your evidence that...
who have I criticised?
You criticised
Boris Johnson fan speaks. Yes, I criticised Boris Johnson for not being there. OK, tell me who I've criticised. Tell me who I've criticised, Mr. Angry.
Stop talking over me, you rude man.
Answer my question.
Well, I will if you listen.
Good. Who have I criticised?
2 ears, 1 mouth.
Who have I criticised? Oh, Richard, this is hilarious. Who have I criticised this morning?
Listen. Oh, you're a clever man. You don't listen. Are you prepared to listen?
Yes, I am. To you telling me who I've criticised this morning from last night's debates.
Right. Be quiet for 15 seconds.
Certainly not. As soon as you answer my question, you've come on here, you've said the reason he didn't do it was because he knew he'd get criticised like you've been criticising all of them this morning. I just want to know who you've heard me criticise.
Where is your evidence that he was terrified?
He wasn't there, you prune.
Listen, prune face, where is your...
So I haven't criticised anybody, and the man who didn't turn up was terrified. Richard, let me make a on a limb here, my friend. You voted Brexit, right? And you like Boris Johnson, yes or no?
Well, you like.
Oh, he's off. 29 minutes after 10. What a funny little fella. So the reason why I categorically haven't criticised any of the contenders in last night's candidate debate, and I apologise. Apparently, I have to explain this again for the hard of thinking, is because I didn't watch it. Therefore, the only person I can criticise is the person that was too frit to turn up. But if you are now so morally and intellectually compromised that you're pretending that not turning up is somehow a sign of anything other than cowardice, then you end up appearing on national radio and making a complete muppet of yourself. Richard, please ring me again. Seriously, I'm beginning to worry that there's not enough comedy on the programme during these difficult political times. In the meantime, on the bright side, your day can't get any worse. We have had a little look at Gove, who Claire wasn't impressed by. We haven't had a look at Boris, because he didn't turn up, which Richard was impressed by. And we're keen to know what else we can derive from last night's leadership debates, which, for the record, I didn't see. Rory Stewart, of course, has received several slightly laudatory mentions as well, although I find myself duty-bound to keep pointing out that he is essentially in favour of option 3, which is do the deal that's been agreed, as opposed to options 1 or 2, which is call the whole thing off or leave without a deal. There is no option 4. Out of all the things I've said to you over the last few years that I hope I'm wrong about, in many ways that would be the biggest. I really, really hope there is an option 4 and that we could somehow come out of this with dignity and economy intact. But I can't see it. I can't get rid of that last % of hope, you know. It might sound a little bit odd, but I hope there is some scintilla of plausibility in the idea that just by changing leader we can completely change the narrative, we can completely change the reality. But it's 1%. 1 to 5%. Depends which way the wind is blowing. So what did you get from last night? And why on earth have we ended up in a place where the man who would be the next Prime Minister is going to be waved into Downing Street despite refusing to be scrutinised or questioned, not just by Krishna Gurumurthy and the Channel 4 viewers last night, but today at the actual hustings, he is hiding from his own MPs. 0345 6060973. If we do this, right, you have to promise not to get me into trouble. What question do you think he's importing my own moral compass into the Conservative Party leadership campaign? I thought Conservative values reflected mine, oddly, on these sort of moral issues. But you might not agree. You might think that, like Donald Trump shooting, it doesn't affect his trustworthiness or suitability to be Prime Minister. What question do you think Boris Johnson is most frightened of? I'll take that, but don't say anything libelous, all right? Adam's in Thurrock. Adam, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Thanks for having me on.
You're very welcome.
Well, I just think that it's a foregone conclusion that Boris is going to be Prime Minister. I think he didn't. Yeah, I think he didn't turn up because of that reason. I think the people behind the scenes.
What do you think he's frightened of? What do you think he's frightened of?
I think he's frightened because there's one thing I noticed regarding the discussions yesterday on the questions there, all the other candidates that are going for it there, that none of them really explained what they were actually going to do if they became Prime Minister. So that was one thing.
With regard to Brexit. Well, Rory Stewart, I suppose, comes closest, does he? I mean, as I mentioned a few times, I didn't see it, but I do know, because I've interviewed him, what he essentially, he's going to try and get the withdrawal agreement through Parliament.
He is. Now, in regards to that, Rory Stewart, I think Rory Stewart, you can see, very, very articulate, very, very clever, but obviously well-educated, and can talk.
They're all well educated. They're all very well educated.
They are all very well educated, but some seem to be better wordsmiths than others.
Yes.
But my point is, Rory Stewart seems to think that there are only 3 options available, and I agree. I think that's correct.
That for me, that is reality. Now, some people will get a little bit upset with that description, but after all of these years of banging our head against the wall, expecting the wall to change, I think most of us, like you and like me, and I don't know how you voted 3 years ago, we can agree on what the wall is and where the wall is, but the other 5 leadership contenders still seem to think that if only we believed enough, the wall will disappear or change.
Well, what I don't understand is this.
Go on.
There's one thing that Boris did say.
Can we call him Johnson? His first name business is, unless we start calling them all by their first name. No, it's all right. I'm a lonely fella in this business, mate. But Boris just makes it sound all cuddly, doesn't it? Let's call him Johnson.
Well, this is one of my points, yes. Mr. Johnson. One of the things he did say in regards to Brexit was that we should be prepared for no deal or WTO deal, or however they want to word
you
it.
Just have to say terms. There's no such thing as a WTO deal. It's just, it would mean trading on the international baseline, the bare minimum of what any country in the civilized and even in the somewhat less civilized world can do.
Okay. So what I did hear him say is that we should have WTO terms in place, ready to take to the negotiating table in Brussels, which will strengthen our arm. Now,
but then you're moving back from the idea that there's only 3 options, because you think, I mean, WTO terms are in place, mate. They're written in stone, as it were. They're the subject of international treaties, and the EU is preparing for a no-deal Brexit. They've been arguably preparing a lot more assiduously for it than we have. So threatening them that we're going to do it, and that's insane. That is literally like threatening to... I tell you what, I thought of this at the weekend, Adam, and I think, unless I've misunderstood you, I think this is where, with respect, you've got it a bit wrong. Brexiters thought that we would hold a gun to their head, right? They still think that no deal is holding a gun to their head and saying, if you don't give us what we want, we'll pull the trigger. Everybody else in the world, certainly everybody else in the European Union, I was in Ireland at the weekend, and it's crystal clear from the other side of the Irish Sea, but it's still not crystal clear here. The gun's been pointing at our own head all along. No deal will upset, damage, harm the other 27 members of the European Union, but not on anything like the scale that it would damage and harm us. Ireland would suffer more than any other country. The other 26 would suffer to varying degrees, but we would be absolutely mullered, to coin a phrase.
The problem that I have is that nobody seems to actually lay it out in layman's terms for the majority of the population that are not well educated. Some of us are clever, but we don't really know the terminology and the nooks and crannies of politics and policies and things like that.
Well, nor do most of the people in Parliament. I think that. Remember, Nadine Dorries had to ask people what the customs union was because she kept losing arguments about why it was a bad idea to leave the customs union. I'll say two things to you because I think I'm second guessing your question. All right. Number one, have a look at what WTO people say. So have a look at what Pascal Lamy says about a no-deal Brexit. He used to be the General Secretary of the WTO. A lot of their former high panjandrums have spoken about the wisdom or otherwise of crashing out with no deal and trading exclusively on what have become known as WTO terms, all right? That's the first and most important thing to do. Have a look at WTO alumni and what they say specifically about the question of whether we'll be in any way better than we are now, but also broadly about the general wisdom of the decision. And the second question that everybody should be asked, but this is one of the reasons why Boris Johnson won't turn up anyway, just in case he is asked it, just name a single country on the planet that trades on the terms that you're espousing. Just name one country that currently trades on WTO terms. Now, when they start blustering and bloviating, you have to interrupt, like I did with the lad from Salford. You can't let people just fly off talking gibberish. If they say something that's not true, you have to pick them up on it. So you pick them up on it and you push and you interrupt and you talk over and you insist that they answer the question. And eventually they have to say there aren't any, right? There's not one country trading on the terms that we're trying to sell to the United Kingdom at the moment. And then you don't interrupt after you've asked this question because the answers will be fascinating. Then you say, why not?
Bye.
And then you get all the information you think you need, Adam.
Okay. See, this is the problem, isn't it? It's lack of information, lack of detail in regards to what will affect us, what won't. Because there's two sides of the coin. Sort of. Both sides are saying that their side that it's better for that. It's better if we leave with WTO on WTO. Other people are saying it's better if we don't.
Yeah, but that's the point I'm making. It's not two sides of the same coin because you won't find anybody informed or experienced in WTO trading who agrees that it's a good idea to do. I think it was Lamy. It might have been a different former General Secretary of the WTO who described it as moving from the Premier League to the 4th Division. That's how he described it. He ran the flipping thing.
Right. So why is WTO terms being spoke about?
Well, I can tell you that.
Being used.
Well,
why?
Let me tell you why. Because after the result came in June 2016 and reality began to nibble but not quite bite, they had to give people something, and I don't know how to say this without sounding a little bit condescending, so I accept.
Who are the contenders here? Well, currently, and appalling,
that they'd conned something that excused them from the business of thinking. So what you came up with was Brexit means Brexit. So people would shout that at me for a while. Or they'd shout, you lost, get over it. And then when I tried to say, yeah, but what have you won? They'd say, Brexit. And I'd say, what is it? And they'd say, Brexit means Brexit. And I'd say, that doesn't mean anything. And they'd go, you lost, get over it. And then they got handed something else, which would be like, no deal is better than a bad deal. And you'd say, explain that. What does it mean? And they couldn't. So they've been given these slogan after slogan after slogan that just pushes reality a bit further down the road. And the latest slogan is, we can come out on WTO terms. Nobody who said that phrase in public knows what it means.
Okay, well, see, this is why I've got no trust in politics because...
Well, that's sad.
What you've just said there is absolutely correct. I totally agree with you. Then you wonder why Theresa May said we leave with... Or no deal is better than a bad deal.
Because she was trying to keep the headbangers on the far right of her own party suite, you see, because she was worried that what has happened would happen, which is that Farage would come into the mix with yet another tissue of nonsense, but very persuasive and seductive nonsense, and the really stupid members of the Conservative Party parliamentary party would start flirting with his nonsense, which is how you get your Francois and your Bridgens and your Dorries essentially turning lack of intelligence into a contact sport.
See, it's a bit like when you've got a party, and it seems like the Conservative Party have got Remainers and Brexiteers all within one party.
Yes, sort of.
Arguing.
Well, that's why Rory Stewart thinks his job is to hold the party together, but I think he's on a hiding to nothing, and I don't see how people like Dominic Grieve or... Do you know they've voted in David Goke, right? Who is widely regarded as the best Justice Secretary we've had in a long time. He voted for the withdrawal agreement 3 times, right? The only way you could have had any Brexit by now, the only way, arithmetically and politically, that you could have had any Brexit by now would have been voting for that withdrawal agreement, and he voted for it 3 times. And do you know what the membership have just done in his own constituency?
No.
They put deselection on the table, because they think that he's frustrating Brexit by voting for the only available Brexit 3 times. And if you think that's mad, do you know what they're accusing Michael Gove of? The co-chair of the Vote Leave campaign?
Right, okay.
Not being a proper leaver. So, Adam, here's my gift to you. I've got to go to the break. If you are feeling that all this is difficult to understand, do not feel bad about it, because the effort that has been put into inflating these barrage balloons of utter bonkers nonsense is absolutely immense. And the effort that's been put into making things honest, comprehensible and true is next to nothing, which is why you chose the right radio programme this morning, Adam.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Where I suppose we have to point out, I don't think I've heard any of these words. I have heard Jeremy uttered, but we were talking about Jeremy Corbyn, so that doesn't count. Have we heard the words Hunt, Sajid or Javid in the course of this conversation? The only reason we've mentioned Dominic Raab is because I was so tickled by the fact that the Daily Telegraph reports, Daily Telegraph, of course, the House Journal of rabid Brexiters, of which Raab is definitely one. The Daily Telegraph, of all places, reports this morning that he was known as the Turnip during his tenure as Secretary of State for Brexit. I found that mildly amusing because I'm quite childish. But we haven't heard any of the other names mentioned. Michael Gove took not quite an early bath, but he took an early coating from Claire for apparently not having been paying attention while simultaneously claiming to be a great fan of detail. But otherwise, all we've talked about is Alexander Boris de Perfeffel Johnson and Rod Stewart. That's his real name. Actually, both of them went to Eton and are known by names other than the ones that they were baptised with. It should be Alex Johnson and Rod Stewart. That's who this should be about. I told you I was childish. But I guess that's quite significant. I've invited you to tell me about what's going on, with reference, but not exclusively, because a lot of people wouldn't have seen it, to what happened last night on Channel 4. So far, the only person to emerge with any credit is Krishna Gurumurthy. Well done, Krish. 0345 606 0973 is the number you need if you want to join in. Steve, and indeed, extra points if you can say the words Hunt, Sajid or Javid in the course of your contribution. Or Rob. Steve's in Camberwell. Steve, what would you like to say?
Yeah, good morning, James.
Hello,
I'm going to try to avoid that pitfall if I possibly can.
Feel free.
I think there's another way of looking at the problem, actually, and I think it would shed a bit of light on it. I think there are 3 positions which are Ultra Leave, which should be Farage and Rees-Mogg and co.
Yes.
Ultra Remain, which should be the Liberal Democrats and Tom Watson.
Call it off.
And then there's this space in the middle that I call Remain Democrats. Now, I mean by that, and I count myself as one of these, somebody who's in favour of Remain,
yes,
but who actually accept that because of the referendum result, we have to go along in some form or other with what the people want. And it doesn't really matter whether we're 52-48 or
yes,
48-52. Either way, we're stuck in a situation. And I would count Rory Stewart as a Remain Democrat.
Yes, I think I would.
I'd also count, and this might be seen a bit, I also count Jeremy Corbyn as a Remain Democrat. So clearly there are different interpretations of what Remain Democrat...
Sorry, I thought we were going to get through a whole call without me having a fight there. But no, he's not a Remain Democrat, right? He's a dishonest Brexiter.
No, I don't agree. I don't
Corbyn?
think... I mean, we can argue about
Corbyn?
it. No, okay. Yeah, Corbyn.
I'll say it again in a slightly higher vocal register, just to express the full extent of my incredulity. Corbyn! All right. The floor is yours. I'm sorry for interrupting.
Okay,
Carry on.
well, I mean, you've got to go, look, somebody who took drugs 30 years ago, they're not necessarily taking drugs today. And I think it's the same with Corbyn. He was
Fair
a
enough.
Benite, and he was a critic. He's always been a critic of the European Union. That's true. And he was a Benite in the 1980s, and Ben didn't want to join all the rest.
He was voting against everything related to the European Union throughout his backbench career. But this isn't the bridge that you came to fight on. So let's chalk Corbyn up. Carry on.
It isn't a bridge I came to fight on. I mean, it's an argument to be had, but it does explain. If you're in that middle camp, whether you're Rory Stewart or Jeremy Corbyn, you are going to be attacked from both sides.
Yeah.
But both sides will feel. So Corbyn is under tremendous pressure from the Liberal Democrats and Tom Watson. And I think there's another thing which I think a Remain Democrat should do. A Remain Democrat should accept the idea of a ratification referendum. In other words, if there is a deal, it should be ratified. Now, that's not the same as having a second referendum to try to reverse.
But what happens if it's not ratified? What if the vote goes no?
Well,
what are the options on the paper, Steve?
Okay, well, the thing is, until the public opinion, I think the Remain Democrats will talk a lot about the country being divided. Until there's been a real significant shift in public opinion in the country, I think politicians have to keep on trying to get an answer to that. Now, Jeremy Corbyn's got a different answer to Rory Stewart on that.
Because very generous to Jeremy Corbyn, but as I said, I'll leave that now.
I think there's criticism of Jeremy, but actually, if you look at it very carefully, what Jeremy Corbyn's saying. Jeremy Corbyn is saying that the deal can be ratified. He says there can be a referendum.
But he's also floating the boat that there's a better deal achievable, and possibly if you took the red lines out of the equation, that might be true. But as long as the red lines are in place, which essentially means abolishing freedom of movement, then there's no way that it's movable. This
I think if you go back to what people voted for in 2016, that's the clue. And if you go back to 2016, you've got to remember.
Again, I'm sorry for doing this, but the bottom line there is in 2016, some people voted to be like Norway and Switzerland. Some people voted to have every benefit of being in the European Union without having to live next door to foreigners or listening to them speak foreign on trains. Some people voted to leave the European Union because they believed that absolute garbage about immigration from Muslim countries. The number of times I've been sent the stuff from other people's Facebook feeds, like people saying, look at what my mum's done, or look at what my cousin's doing. I voted to leave the European Union to stop immigration from Muslim countries. The idea that 17.4 million people all voted for, quotes, anything at all, end quotes, is absurd. And the perfect proof of this, Michael Gove was chairman of Vote Leave, and now they're calling him a traitor.
Yes, I agree with what you just said, James, but the point I was going to make was that England and Wales voted to leave the European Union, but Northern Ireland and Scotland voted to remain. Yeah. That's the first thing.
So what's a one-nation Tory then?
Let me just have one other point.
Of course, sorry. Yes.
Nobody voted to leave the single market or the customs union because it wasn't on the ballot paper.
But they all say they did.
Different things about that.
They all say they did now.
They did.
And do you know the best bit? My favourite bit of Brexit bonkersness at the moment, and obviously it's a very crowded field and the leader can change all the time, they are genuinely saying that people voted to leave the customs union and the single market because the other side told them that's what would happen. That's the logic. You've heard this.
Isn't
that incredible?
I mean, Cameron lied about it as part of campaign fear. He wanted to frighten everybody by saying if you vote to leave, it'll mean you leave the single market and the customs union. That was campaign fear.
I don't know if he was lying.
The other side said, no, we're not leaving any of those things. We can stay in the single market.
But they didn't believe the side that they voted for. They didn't believe the side that they voted for, Steve. They believed the side that they didn't vote for.
Exactly, absolutely. That's the contradiction. That's the thing that has to be played on. So I think there is a democratic answer, James, to this situation.
Which is to have, but again, you're not quite clear on what's going to be on the paper when we have that democratic inquiry, and I don't see how you can be. You need to. At no point will these people be persuaded that there isn't a better deal that's achievable, right up until the point where they lead us kicking and screaming over the cliff of no deal at all. That's the real cognitive dissonance here. The biggest cognitive dissonance of all is there is definitely a better deal available. I just can't tell you what it is yet. And I will continue insisting that there is a better deal available. But the latest claim is that Boris Johnson's, and I kid you not, charisma is somehow going to prove more conducive to encouraging the European Commission to turn its back upon 3 years of consistent pronouncement and negotiation. Boris Johnson's charisma is somehow going to be the difference between what Theresa May could achieve and what he could achieve. And they're going to carry on claiming that, even after Boris Johnson's charisma has disappeared under the sea. They're going to carry on claiming that there is definitely a better deal available, but we can't get it, and that's why we're going to leave with no deal at all. And that concludes this morning's Brexit sermon.